All right, to start off, what is your name and what do you do for the state of Iowa?
So I'm Mike Nag, and I'm the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Iowa.
Okay, great. To start off, how has fertilizer affected wildlife in the places that are polluted by it?
Well, so first of all, I think starting out with talking about the impact or what's water quality, I think, in the state of Iowa and what's the impact of fertilizer on that. So I think there's a lot of things that impact water quality in the state, and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus would be one of those factors. So it's not necessarily a widespread issue, but it is certainly something that we're thinking a lot about. It's obviously driving what we're doing with the nutrient reduction strategy. So the places that are impacted by nutrients can very much have an impact on water quality. And when I think of the impact on animals, it's usually the animals, the aquatic life that's in that water, not necessarily the wildlife that would be interacting with the water or drinking from it.
Right. So, what can we do to solve the problem of fertilizer?
Well, so again, I think I want to make sure we're clear that farmers use fertilizer. It's an important input in crop production, and fertilizer is expensive, and it's something that farmers don't put excess fertilizer on, and yet it's true that we do end up with more nitrogen and more phosphorus in our water than what we would like, which is why we're trying to implement practices to reduce that. So I just want to be careful that we're not giving the impression that fertilizer is directly being applied into water, or that it's only the fertilizer that's applied to fields that impacts water. Something that I think is an interesting fact about nitrogen is that Iowa has very, very productive soil. So we've got a lot of phosphorus and a lot of nitrogen that are naturally occurring in our soils. We might have as much as 10,000 pounds of nitrogen in an acre of farm ground. And a farmer might apply, maybe between 150 and 200 pounds of nitrogen in a growing season per acre. So there's a lot of naturally occurring nitrogen and nutrients that can be lost from acres as well. So I think that's an important piece, that it's not all just the fertilizer that farmers are applying. Now, what can we do to better manage those nutrients? I think it does start with how farmers, what they do in terms of practices. So are they applying the right amounts of fertilizer? Are they doing it, multiple times during the year? So the idea being, you don't just fertilize your crop once. You might, apply smaller amounts at multiple times throughout the year and give the crop just what it needs. And I think that's something we call precision agriculture. And that's something that's done through using technology, computers, to help us apply that fertilizer exactly where we need it, when we need it, in the right form. And so that's one piece of it, is making sure we're using the right amounts at the right times in the right places. And then the other piece of that would be trying to keep those nutrients on the land. So using things like cover crops and no-till and some other conservation practices that help us keep soil in place. And so I think it's a little bit. It's two things. It's making sure we're doing the right things on the application side, but then also protecting our soil on the other end.
Okay, so one thing our group researched a lot is buffer strips. Tell us what you know about that.
Yeah, great practice. Buffer strips are one of those. So you go back to the last question. It's the things that you can do to keep soil on the farm, and buffer strips are a great way to literally buffer between the land, farmland, and water, and trap those nutrients, trap that soil. Mostly what we say is that phosphorus tends to stick to soil, and nitrogen tends to move with water. And so buffers are a great practice for helping us reduce phosphorus loss. And they don't necessarily do a lot to help us with nitrogen, because water will flow through those buffers. So it's a good example of a great practice, but it also is an example of how it doesn't do everything that we need it to do. But we certainly encourage the adoption and planting of buffers everywhere in the state. In fact, we've got some programs here that provide cost share to help farmers and landowners implement those practices to hopefully provide an incentive for more of that to happen in the state.
Okay, so what are some difficulties we could have solving this problem and like getting farmers on board?
Yeah, so first of all, I think we've got a lot of experience in the state of Iowa working with farmers and landowners to implement practices. So, we've gone with decades and decades of work that's been done, and Iowa really has been a leader in preventing soil erosion, and we've also been a leader in trying to improve water quality. So I would start by saying that there's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done. Here in the state of Iowa, our legislature has appropriated dollars to our department to be able to work with farmers and put people out across the state to work with farmers and landowners to implement practices. So that's, I think, how we need to get it done. We need to go out and work with farmers, work with landowners, look at their land, help them understand where would a practice fit, and then be able to provide some cost share to help them implement those practices. Now, some of the challenges, the barriers to getting that work done is, it just seems like there's never quite enough time or resources or people to do that. So we do have limited ability to go out and work with folks, but we're getting better and better at it all the time. I think the other thing that helps us with that is that the state is really interested in working with the private sector, folks that aren't in government, to help us go work with farmers and landowners. And that's helped us reach more and more people. So, the other barrier that can be out there is it does take money on the part of the farmer or the landowner to actually invest in these practices. And when farm prices are not good, and we've had a couple of years here where we've had low farm prices, I think that can be challenging then for farmers to be able to afford to implement some of these practices. So those are a few of the barriers that I do see.
Okay, thank you so much for talking with us. That's about all the time we have. We really appreciate you. We learned a lot from this.
Well, thank you, and this is a great topic. It's a really, really important topic. We've got to take care